Times they are a-changing, so the rules of the game have changed. Today is a day of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And every time this happens, the rules of the game change. And I'm just describing the way those rules have changed. So I began my flyer with a quote from King Lear. Let me see if I can find a flyer. Here's a flyer. It says, psycho-spiritual development in a time of evolutionary change. And it begins with this quote from King Lear. The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. So with this is a moment in King Lear when King Lear's corpse is lying in front of his most trusted servant, and he realizes King Lear has blown it. Like he's trusted his untrustworthy daughter, actually his untrustworthy two daughters, he betrayed his trustworthy daughter, and he's gone mad, and he's just lying there dead. And he's saying, we don't have to praise this king because he was an incredibly stupid king. Do you understand? So he's saying, we speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. We ought to say, oh, what a great king. Well, he wasn't a great king. So he says, he's speaking what we feel, and what he meant by the oldest hath borne most is that he has suffered the most. So we're going to talk about how his stupidity has created suffering. And what I'm going to talk about today is how the stupidity of the rulers of the planet have created an immense dilemma that is planetary. So we that are young shall never see so much stupidity, nor live so long to see such stupidity. So I'm going to begin my talk by talking about these three times, and it's trying to just describe the way that the epoch we're in is just changing today. So the Greek word for, actually the Latin word for epoch is scene, S-C-E-N-E. And as you notice, all these end with C-E-N-E. So the Pleistocene epoch is a geological epoch which started 2,580,000 years ago and ended 12,000 BC. And it's usually called the Ice Age. And it was a time when glaciers covered the earth, and human beings were hunters and gatherers. They were fighting for their existence against nature. And in some very strange sense, man was symbiotic with nature. They were attuned to nature. They were attuned to nature's spirits. They were nature religions. And all the religions in that time, as far as we could see, made the feminine more important than the masculine. It was like we find these little statues from that period, and they're all feminine figures, like Venuses, and none of them were male figures. So now a very interesting way that Darwinian evolution worked for the primacy of the feminine during this period. Now, did you know that the only mammal that experiences menopause is the human? Chimpanzee. Oh, hi. Come to the talk?
Yes.
Okay. Can you turn it off for a second or not? Humanity was facing an ice age, and they were symbiotic with nature. And the feminine was predominant. Like we have religions up to that time, they worship the feminine more than the masculine. So it's just about the evolution of humanity. So we can go on again?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's happened is that nature conspired in the Pleistocene era to make women predominant in a very strange way. And there was a phenomenon in nature called menopause. And menopause does not exist in any other mammal. It doesn't exist in chimpanzees. It doesn't exist in gorillas. The reason for menopause is that it keeps the older females alive. See, this is Darwinian theory. In other words, older chimpanzees die in childbirth. Older gorillas die in childbirth. It's a very dangerous process in nature to give birth to a child. Humans, because there's menopause, the older women stay alive. So why is it to the benefit of the species to keep the older women alive? It's because, for three reasons. First of all, they have the herbal knowledge They help the people, like the warrior gets wounded trying to kill a mammoth, and they have the knowledge of herbs. Secondly, they're the ones that nurture the children while the men are out fighting. Last and probably most important, men with a lot of testosterone love to fight. So it's the older women that can control the men who want to fight. See, like the young buck wants to fight the next village, and his wife can't stop him, but his mother can. And so that's the theory about why humans develop menopause, to keep older women alive. So that was what's useful for the species. So from the Pleistocene age, we move to the next stage, which started 12,000 BC, called the Anthropocene. Now this is no longer a geological age, but it was the moment the ice started receding. See, the Earth was actually much colder during those over 2 million years. And the Anthropocene was the time when the ice began moving to the north, it began getting warm, and at this point what happened is agricultural communities took over in the Fertile Crescent, and all sorts of religions came to humanity. These religions were not feminine oriented, they were all patriarchal. And the reason they were patriarchal is that men were better at violence than women. And they organized to be, you know, in armies or in tribes or nations, and they had hierarchical structure, and they could defeat essentially the more hunter-gatherer tribes that were more feminist, and they always created a patriarchal religion that centered around the concept of should. They all created 10 commandments or whatever shoulds that you had. Sexual shoulds about what you could do, shoulds about even strange things. I lived in Hawaii where a commoner could be murdered if he ever ate a banana. So there was all these hierarchies that men created around the shoulds. So in this stage, it's, to use a pun from our current president, it's humans trumped nature. So during the Anthropocene stage, humans are the ones that control the show, and actually they began creating climate change. They were ones that began affecting the ecology of the planet. That didn't happen during the previous stage, when man was synergistic with nature. So in this stage, in the Anthropocene, Saturn rules. Saturn is the male planet, and that's the constriction and restriction. Now, we are currently in a very specific part of the Anthropocene era called Capitalocene. So what actually rules at this particular moment is money. So everything has a price. This has never existed before in history. Like, let's say, in hunter-gatherers, it wasn't money that, it was the tribe that decided how to distribute what they gained. In the Anthropocene, it was mostly hierarchies, like kings and aristocracy that had the power. But it wasn't money that chose. Now, at this point, is like money is what rules in every country of the earth, and it's just how resources are distributed by money. Now, this is having a very negative effect on the planet in that nature is the cheapest commodity. So at this point, every year there's less fish in the ocean. Every year there's less minerals in the mountain. Maybe most importantly, we're cutting down the trees. Like there's a new president in the Amazon whose program was to kill the Indians in the Amazon and cut down the whole jungle because it was profitable. And the Brazilian people went along with that because they wanted money before, whatever, preserving what might be sacred in nature. So so where my talk is going to begin is I am trying to create in this Capitalocene era a respect for the sacred. So this is a response to rampant materialism, and I want to introduce one concept that's going to come back again and again in this talk called sacrifice. So in one moment we're going to, so the word sacrifice is from the two Latin words. Sacer means sacred, and facere means to make. So sacrifice is to make sacred, and we're going to talk about how sacrifice changes over time. So I'm going to suggest that there's a certain new type of sacrifice required in this certain age. So Now, at this point, we're going to do a video about a certain statement by Albert Hoffman the year before he died. He died at the age of 102, and this is a statement that supposedly he made 101. Now, it's very funny. It's in the voice of who is it? Maybe it's the voice of Terence McKenna, who was dead in 2007. So we don't know if it's a voice from the dead or maybe it was an earlier quote. But it's a quote from Albert Hoffman that you could read it. It's just 2 minutes.
Alienation from nature and the loss of the experience of being part of the living creation is the greatest tragedy of our materialistic era. It's the causative reason for ecological devastation and climate change. Therefore, I attribute absolute highest importance to consciousness change. I regard psychedelics as catalyzers for this. They are tools which are guiding our perception toward other deeper areas of our human existence, so that we again become aware of our spiritual essence. Psychedelic experiences in a safe setting can help our consciousness open up to this sensation of connection and being one with nature. LSD and related substances are not drugs in the usual sense, but are part of the sacred substances which have been used for thousands of years in ritual settings. The classic psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline are characterized by the fact that they're neither toxic nor addictive. It is my great concern to separate psychedelics from the ongoing debates about drugs and to highlight the potential inherent to these substances for self-awareness as an adjunct in therapy and for fundamental research into the human mind. It is my wish that a modern Eleusis will emerge in which seeking humans can learn to have transcendent experiences with sacred substances in a safe setting. I'm convinced that these soul-opening, mind-revealing substances will find their appropriate place in our society and our culture. Dr. Albert Hoffman, April 19, 2007.
So that's the whole diagram. So April 19th was the day that Albert Hoffman discovered a substance called LSD. Well, actually, he discovered it in 1938, but the first LSD trip on the planet was taken on April 19th of 1943. So, yeah, maybe we can put up his picture again. See, it was read by Alex Gray, that's it. So Alex Gray is still alive, so it wasn't read by Terence McKenna. So that solves the mystery. I thought someone was reading it from the dead. Anyway, so let's go. So what we see here is that Albert Hoffman was, I believe, the most important scientist of the 20th century, more important than Albert Einstein, in that he both discovered LSD and he was the first one to synthesize psilocybin, and he also discovered microdosing. So when he was 100 years old, he could no longer take full LSD trips. So he started doing microdosing, and he told another man, James Fadiman, about it. So, and he felt that the reason he lived healthily to 102 was LSD. He felt that it reset his pineal gland, it reset his pituitary gland. He felt it was the best health food on the planet. So just to go on with what he said in the final note of that video, did you hear him mention a city named Eleusis? So Eleusis was a little village in Greece that was 13 miles from Athens, where they had a psychedelic ceremony for at least 1,600 years. And what Albert Hoffman proved in this book, called The Road to Eleusis, is he proved that they had a primitive form of LSD, because they had the same fungus that he used to make LSD. It's called an ergot, it's called Claviceps purpura, and it grows on the grain of Greece even to this day. And he showed that the chemists in ancient Greece had a way of creating LSD, but because they were afraid of it getting among the population, they only would permit it to be used in this one temple called Eleusis. So the Greek governments created a death penalty if it was ever used outside that temple. but twice a year it was permitted in the temple. Once in March, which is called Lesser Mysteries, and once in September, the Greater Mysteries. So this was, and just to show you other books that about Eleusis. So this is one called Eleusis, Archetypal Image of Mother and Daughter by Carl Perenier. And this is another book by Albert Hoffman where he states this was published posthumously, Hoffman's Elixir, LSD in the New Eleusis. So that was his final wish, that we can create a place in the West where we can have a new temple where LSD could be given with permission of the government. So now, just talk a little bit about the initial Eleusis that existed for 600 years. So as I mentioned, it was a tiny, tiny village 13 miles from Athens. Athens was the center of both the Greek and in some sense the Roman emperors. So it was the only paved road in all of Greece at that time, because they considered it that important. So if you, the actual ceremony when it existed was a 10-day ceremony. Like it took thousands of people 10 days to get from Athens to this little town of Eleusis, and each day there was a specific thing to do. So at the end of the ceremony, they would take a psychedelic substance called kykeon. It was a drink. So this temple, unlike any other temple in Greece, had no place for theater performances. The only thing was in the front, a place where a drink was given to people. So it was a psychedelic ceremony. So, I mean, imagine, to give it a modern reference, imagine that Burning Man was 13 miles from San Francisco and anyone could just walk for 10 days or 9 days and go to the ceremony. And so that in general, there were about thousands of people taking it, and the substance was free. It was never a charge, but of course you could give a donation to the priests. And many of the Greek and Roman emperors took this substance. Like the most famous person to take it was a Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius, who was so excited by what happened, he built the biggest temple in Eleusis. So it was, now interestingly enough, the Persians, who were in modern terms are Iranian, hated drugs and hated psychedelics. So when they attacked and conquered Athens, they destroyed the temple. That was 480 BC. So they destroyed it, they killed whoever they could kill, but then the Athenians again began winning wars against the Persians, and they recreated the temple. So it was part of that Greek religion was to keep this psychedelic ceremony going. So it's, now, I'd like to just say one more word about the little town of Eleusis, then I'm going to give the myth associated with Eleusis. So, as I said, it existed for 1,600 years. The first signs of the ceremony are 1200 BC, became really strong. 800 BC, and then it was actually made illegal, and I wonder if anyone here can guess who made actually a death penalty to participate in any ceremony of Eleusis. Can you guess who did that?
Caesar?
What?
Caesar?
No, it was happening during Caesar. It was, do you want to say?
Christians.
The Christians, she got it right. The Christians thought there was a competition to Jesus. See, they wanted to believe in one God and be born again in that one God, and here everyone has access to the divine. So they saw that was the first war on drugs. So they made an effort to close down Eleusis, and they made it a death penalty. And then another people, after the temple was vacated, another people called the Visigoths actually destroyed the temple. It was bigger than the Parthenon, and you can still go and see the ruins if you want. It's still there, a suburb of Athens. Okay, so now we're going to the myth of Eleusis. So there are three parts to the myth. One is called the descent, the second is called the search, and the last is called the ascent, which is redemption. So the myth of Eleusis is basically a myth of three characters. The three characters are Persephone. Persephone is innocence itself. Second character is her mother, dearly devoted mother called Demeter, who in the astrological chart is called Ceres. That's the Greek name for Demeter. And the last person in the chart is called Hades, or in the myth is called Hades, who is the god of the underworld, of the unconscious. So before I give the story, maybe we could show that other slide of, this is it's called the rape of Proserpina. Proserpina was the Roman name for Persephone, and it's often called rape, but it's probably not the best word, in that they're both gods, and he wasn't that interested sexually, although they did do that, but it was more like an abduction. So this is this is a sculpture by a 16th century Italian named Bernini, and it shows Persephone about to be abducted into the underworld, and that's Hades on the left. So in this story, Persephone is innocence itself. She is a maiden. She's about maybe a young teenager, and very protected by her mother. And her mother tells her not to go to the river to pick a flower called the narcissus. Interesting enough, this has a relationship to modern disorders called narcissism. Anyway, Persephone, being disobedient, goes and picks a narcissus, and as she picks it, up from the underworld comes Hades in a horse. This doesn't show the horse, but in the myth there was a horse, and he just grabs her and takes her to the underworld. Now Demeter hears Persephone scream, but can't find out where she is. So for the next 10 days, which is the same number of days as the trip to Eleusis, she's searching everywhere for her daughter. And she comes to the town of Eleusis. Hi, welcome. So she comes to the town of Eleusis, and at that point, what she discovers is that there's a very friendly family there, and there's a whole other part of the myth where she tries to make a child immortal by putting it in the fire. And then the mother discovers it and stops it, so she stops the process of immortality. But while she's in this town of Eleusis, she stopped everything on the earth from growing. So all the gods in Greek are very greedy gods, and they want to have humans sacrifice to them. So no sacrifices are happening. Nothing is growing. All the animals are dying. So all the gods come and complain to Zeus, hey, we need to get Persephone back to Demeter, because Demeter is the goddess of fertility. She stops everything from growing on the planet, right? So everything is dried up, no animals, so all the gods get together. Now Hades happens to be Zeus's brother, so Zeus sends Hermes, the god of communication, to the underworld. Hermes can go anywhere. Hermes, the Latin name is Mercury. Anyway, he sends Hermes down to the underworld. Hermes tells Hades, your jig is up. You have to let go of Persephone. So Hades knows that Zeus is running the show, and he's the brother, so he says, okay, I will let go of Persephone, but I want to have one last act before I let go. And Hermes says, well, what do you want to do? You got to let go of Persephone. So she says, I want to give her a choice to take a gift from me. So Hermes says, well, if you do it quickly, I'll let you give a choice. So he hands Persephone pomegranate seeds. And from the pomegranate seeds, Persephone picks 4 seeds, and she eats them. And then Hermes whisks it back to Demeter, who's in Eleusis. Eleusis, in gratitude, gives humans this psychedelic ceremony. So she gives them the kykeon, she gives them the psychedelics, but then she asks Persephone, oh, by the way, did you voluntarily ever take anything in the underworld? Persephone says, yes, as I was leaving, I took 4 pomegranate seeds. So Demeter goes, oh my God, oh my Zeus maybe, you are going to have to be let go of me now for 4 months of every year. For each pomegranate seed you took, you will have to go back to the underworld. So that's the story of the Greeks have about the origin of winter. Every year for 4 months, Persephone joins Hades in the underworld, and you have what's called winter. But in terms of, let's say, our own psychology today, what the myth of Eleusis has to present to us is a tragic view of life. See, that's what's lost in, let's say, our current narratives. We all have this happy ever after, and we have everything is, everyone can be happy. Well, the Greeks didn't have that. They had the center of this, their philosophy, that there's trauma. That's why this was the most important myth in ancient Greece. The second most important myth was the myth of Dionysius. Now, interestingly enough, at the Dionysius ceremonies, everyone used wine, and they got drunk. Wine was prohibited at Eleusis. You were only allowed to take a psychedelic substance. You were not allowed to take wine. Anyway, so what the relationship to trauma is to, we're now moving to modern psychology, is to sacrifice your reactivity. So the way I use psychedelics in my practice is to help people to sacrifice their reactive nature to trauma. See, now the way the psyche works is whenever there's been a trauma, particularly early in life, the person is stuck in the trauma, in the story of the trauma, in the narrative of the trauma, and most of these people become addicts. So my attempt is to use psychedelics to release people from their trauma. Now, there's also another goal in using psychedelics, which is called enlightenment. This is what this school here is devoted to, post-classical science, and that's called enlightenment. And so, in my view, enlightenment is the ultimate disappointment for the ego. In other words, as you move into these psychedelic states, it's the ego that gets least satisfied. And the way that we do this in psychology is often with a whole system called the Enneagram. The Enneagram is 9 different types, and it's each one is an egoic function, and then the work is to sacrifice the egoic function through acceptance. Now, so I would like to just say, to conclude this talk, I'd like to say 2 more things. First is that the heart of this Eleusinian mystery is that anyone's worst nightmare might be their greatest dream struggling to come to realization. So I'll repeat that. Your worst nightmare might be your greatest dream struggling to come to realization. So Persephone has her worst nightmare when she's grabbed by Hades and taken to the underworld, but as you see, she takes the 4 pomegranate seeds, and somehow she gets that it's not quite as terrible as she thought. And that's the main function of psychedelics in many people. They find that dying to their ego is not quite as scary as they thought. They can do that better with a psychedelic substance than possibly any other way quickly. There are other ways to do it slowly, like holotropic breathing is a way to do it slowly, cognitive therapy is a way to do it slowly, but the quickest way to get a glimpse of what it's like to be ego-free is through psychedelics. So I'd like to just end on a more personal note. So my own 3 goals in life at this point are to cultivate intimacy, which means for me non-defensive communication. The way that I'm trying to do that in particular is a very Greek way of cultivation of virtues. So at this point I've decided that there are 4 virtues I want to cultivate. One is called kindness, another is patience, generosity. Most important to me is non-attachment to my own preferences. So I try to do those every day, and I feel that its main effect is making me less and less defensive, more and more vulnerable, because I'm not trying to, what can I say, to be, the way I would put it is that the ego can either be, or I'd say, I can either be right or peaceful, but not both. So if I try to be right, I'm going to lose my peace, so I try to practice peace. The second main goal in my own life is I'm writing a memoirs. So I've actually finished 3 chapters, because I lived the last 9 months in Thailand, and I did 3 chapters, but there are 9 chapters, so I'm trying to find time and space to do that. The last thing I'm trying to do with this life is an intelligent way to bring psychedelics into both the therapeutic use and communal use. So I have much experience in my practice of my clients are in San Francisco. Many of them are on psychedelics because that's the big thing in San Francisco at the moment, microdosing, psilocybin. Many of them do ayahuasca on the weekends. They also do ketamine, whatever. San Francisco is an unusual world, but also I participate in Burning Man in group ceremonies where you try to see what happens when a group does psychedelics together. So, and I'll say my greatest wish, may not be possible this lifetime, would be, I'm a Virgo, so Virgos like purity. So I would like to be pure and naked as a star in the sky. So that would be my greatest wish, be pure as naked as a star in the sky, and it'd be the reason I like the star. It has no shadow. The star has no shadow. It's the only thing that doesn't have a shadow. If you're a sun, you have no shadow. It also has no veils. There's nothing hidden, no defenses. Anyway, so that would be my wish, just to be as naked and pure as a star. Thank you.